The National Debt Crisis, Part 2, Rating the Rating Agencies. This is an excerpt from my book, which shows backwards here, but it reads The National Debt Crisis, America's Armageddon. This runs about 11 minutes. The major rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and the Fitch Group, failed miserably when they severely overrated mortgage-backed securities prior to the 2007-2008 recession. What was supposed to be the first line of defense for investors turned out to be a gross misrepresentation of the riskiness of the investments and, by extension, the true market value of the securities. If these securities were properly rated to reflect the risk of the underlying assets, the home loans, it is probable that the housing bubble would have never developed and the entire recession could have been avoided. Currently, planet Earth consists of over 190 nations. Of these, fewer than 20 earn the top rating of the three major credit agencies. Moody's short definition of a top-rated entity is, quote, obligations rated AAA are judged to be of the highest quality with minimal credit risk. Envision a world where there exists a fictitious country that has an economy equal to that of the United States, and this country has no national debt, no unfunded liabilities, a balanced budget, and a positive economic outlook for years to come. It stands to reason any nation the size of the United States who sported such strong financial numbers would deserve the highest possible rating. However, the United States, as it exists today, in my opinion, sports a balance sheet that would barely qualify it for a rating much higher than junk bond status. The financial condition of the United States looks more like the balance sheet of Greece, Spain, and Italy, the three countries that personify what a poor economy looks like, and in recent times caused negative ripples in many of the world's bonds and stock markets. The United States is expected to have a national debt approaching $20 trillion by the time President Obama leaves office. We have not done a very good job spending, borrowing about $1 million a year over the last 6 years just to meet budget expenses. In addition, by 2017, the United States will need to budget at least $1 trillion a year just to cover debt interest expense. In a normal interest rate environment, it would require at least 20% of all tax revenues just to pay the interest on the national debt. This statement assumes an interest rate of at least 5%, which is less than the average interest rate over the 45 years preceding the 2007-2008 recession. Add to that around $90 trillion in unfunded liabilities, perpetual budget overruns, and you have a picture of the United States as it exists today. In my opinion, the major credit agencies are currently misrepresenting the true value of the Treasury securities that comprise the national debt. Moody's and the Fitch Group currently assign their top rating to the sovereign debt of the United States in spite of all the financial issues I just identified. S&P assigned the second highest rating. Two of the three rating agencies rate the creditworthiness of the United States as perfect and equal to the creditworthiness of the fictitious nation described above, a nation with a perfect balance sheet. How the rating agencies justify their ratings is beyond me. I confess I don't have a clue about the process the rating agencies use to determine the credit status of any entity, but I don't believe that it should in any way distract from my opinions and conclusions. After all, I believe my opinions are just stating the obvious. Any corporations whose balance sheet listed liabilities and assets, any corporation whose balance sheet listed more liabilities than assets would be considered bankrupt. The rating agencies apparently believe the balance sheet of a sovereign nation deserves different considerations than a corporation. This, of course, is correct, given that sovereign nations have the power to regulate its income and spending. However, this power is often abused by politicians because spending brings in votes and taxes chases votes away. There is no question that the United States is far and away the largest economic power on earth. This, of course, raises the question, why can't the United States live within its means? This is a matter for a separate discussion, but I will point out that we have the added responsibility of being a protector of the free world, which requires an overwhelming and costly military presence. In addition, through the use of foreign aid, we attempt to guarantee our sphere of influence. In my opinion, the best gauge of a country's financial stability is the ratio of debt to GDP. That is the total gross amount the country borrows as a percentage of its gross domestic product. Though the following stats from the IMF may be a little dated, they do illustrate my point. I use 4 examples here. As of 2014, the United States had a GDP to debt ratio of 106%, Italy 108%, Spain 167%, Greece 174%. According to Eurostat, the average debt to GDP ratio for the 28 member countries of the European Union was 80%. At 106% debt to GDP ratio, the financial stability of the United States can only be described as poor. Yet despite this glaring black eye, the rating agencies still give the United States a stellar credit rating. Perhaps the rating agencies rate sovereign debt on a curve. They may view the sheer size of our country as our strongest point and conclude that size alone would be a major factor that will enable us to better withstand major financial shocks. If this is the case, they are absolutely wrong. The bursting of the housing bubble affected every single and multifamily home in the United States. To the best of my knowledge, the fact that the U.S. housing market was the largest in the world had no effect on the way the crisis played out. I believe the rating agencies do view the size of the American economy as a major positive. After all, what other reason could they give for using their top rating? I am of the opinion that once the Federal Reserve ends its bond borrowing program, investors will demand higher rates on Treasury securities they purchase. The purpose of the extremely low interest rate policy put into effect by the Federal Reserve at the start of the 2007-2008 recession was to stimulate the economy. However, in my opinion, the Federal Reserve was unsure of its own ability to keep interest rate at the low levels they had set. The massive debt accumulated during the early stages of the recession had damaged the creditworthiness of the United States. In order to keep interest rates down, the Fed undertook an unprecedented action and started a massive bond buying program, purchasing $75 billion a month. This action was, in fact, an insurance policy undertaken by the Federal Reserve to prevent bond traders from pushing interest rates up. The total purchase exceeded $4 trillion. In my mind, this action only solidifies my belief that without Fed intervention, interest rates would surely rise, and the Fed was aware of this. The Fed's bond buying program is scheduled to end late in 2014. I believe at that time bond traders will demand higher interest rates before adding to their positions. At the present time, they cannot do anything to offset the Fed's action, but once the bond buying program ends, I believe interest rates will trend upward, possibly sharply upward. The reason is the deterioration of the financial condition of the United States that has taken place since the start of the recession and the institution of the Fed's artificially low rate policy. I also believe that the Wall Street slogan, "Don't fight the Fed," will go down in flames, and that many traders worldwide will liquidate their investments or hold back on new investments until they receive the higher rates to compensate them for the added risk in owning United States debt. I believe the Fed will be hapless as they will be unable to stop it. As stated above, if the major rating agencies factored in the size of the United States economy in assigning their best or near best rating, they are severely off base. When it comes to evaluating the creditworthiness of a country whose financial condition is in question, bigger is not an asset, it's a liability, because it will require a larger effort for a nation to get its house in order. The major credit agencies are doing this country and those who invest in our debt a severe disservice because they are masking the true status of the economic condition and, by extension, the risk in investing in Treasury securities that support the national debt. Because of the Fed's low-rate policy, the purchase of a 10-year Treasury note in 2012 will be stuck with an interest rate of about 1.75% through 2022. If an investor made the same purchase today, August 2014, he will be stuck with the same interest rate of about 2.5% through 2024. If my assumptions are correct, by 2020, the 10-year Treasury will yield between 5 and 7%. In fact, I believe these securities should yield the higher rates right now. The Fed's low-rate policy enforced by the bond buying program prevents this from taking place. Once the bond buying program ends, as previously stated, I expect interest rates to rise, possibly sharply. Nevertheless, these Treasury securities will be overpriced because the major credit agencies will continue to severely overrate the creditworthiness of the United States. As previously stated, had the major credit agencies properly rated the mortgage-backed securities that finance the overvalued home loans, the housing bubble may have been prevented and the recession avoided. Once the recession began and the finger-pointing started, the credit agencies took a lot of heat. You would think that taking the blame for a recession that caused both homeowners and stockholders many trillions of dollars would encourage the agencies to reevaluate their criteria for assigning credit ratings. Since two of the three major credit agencies continue to assign their top credit ratings to the United States debt, I can only assume nothing has changed. Unfortunately, politics plays a role on major issues unfavorable to someone's ideology. On August 5th of 2011, S&P lowered the rating of the sovereign debt of the United States from AAA to AA+ with a negative outlook. On August 11th, only 4 days later, a Democratic Conventional Committee decided to investigate S&P on the issue of their downgrade. This may be a factor in why the credit agencies continue to overrate U.S. debt. The major credit agencies blew it once, and now that they are blowing it again. Thank you for listening.